and welcome to episode number 84 of Gar Borras' Time Machine. And before we get started today, Gar, I'd like to wish you and all the fathers out there a very happy Father's Day, because we're recording this on Father's Day. So today we're going to be talking all about 50 years of Aerosmith's breakthrough album, Toys in the Attic, which of course came out in 1975. Now, Gar, in talking to you in preparation for today's episode, you let me in on the fact that you were indeed a huge Aerosmith fan. So let's talk about what are your memories of Aerosmith and Toys in the Attic, and how you first became an Aerosmith fan.
Well, when they came out with this album, it was 1975.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, in chronologically in my life, 1975 was the year that I graduated from high school, and so the 70s, was heavily influenced by bands like Queen,
sure,
Kansas, Jethro Tull, Pink Floyd. All of those bands were like, major powerhouses at the time. And these new kids on the block, so to speak, started, gaining a lot of attention. And, so when this album came out, I was, still, kind of, I would still consider myself in the learning stages, because it was my first foray in playing in bands.
Oh, okay.
And things like that. So for me, I was, kind of like a sponge at that time, for all of this stuff. And when they came out with this album, it was really pretty undeniable.
Yeah.
That this album had some really, good, really well done songs. I mean, songs that stand up with the other guys that they were kind of trying to, go up the ranks, work their way up the ranks.
Yeah.
And so, it really, in going back and listening to it, it really brought back memories of that time period, and it wasn't the songs that were major hits that was, taking me back. It were the songs that were being played on the radio at the time. Sure. But it didn't become, these iconic hits. And, you could really listen to them at that time and really see how they were very young at the time.
Sure.
Very young at the time, but at that moment, they had matured. Because not many, people mature at that young of an age, where they were at that stage of the game. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure. I mean,
So
yeah.
It was just, you go back and you listen and you hear songs that, you can definitely tell that they were influenced by the Black Sabbath of the time.
Sure.
And all of that stuff. You could hear their influence, and you could also hear Steven Tyler's kind of New Orleans bluesish scat beginning. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Because at this time when they were doing this, he was just, learning how to use that into his, what they were doing in rock and roll. Because it was a very different delivery as far as lead vocals. It was,
Sure.
And it has always been Steven Tyler's originality in him always having that New Orleans blues scat influence that he brought to rock and roll. And nobody else as a singer really did do that, because, I think if anybody else tried to do it, they'd just be looked at as a copycat.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and Gar...
Tyler just owned it.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
He really owns that. And all of that stuff, this album signifies all of that stuff coming together at that time, where not only the musicians had matured as musicians at that time, but they had also matured as songwriters and as guys, as people, as understanding how to work in the recording studio, and how to use the recording studio, as a tool for their craft.
Sure, and I'm glad you brought up about Steven Tyler's gift as a vocalist and a songwriter, especially in reference to what is referred to as scat vocal and rhyme scheming. I seen him in an interview once talking about when they were recording whatever at the time was the latest album, and he says oftentimes when I'm getting an idea for a song or I want to write a song, he goes, I'll just do what's called scat voting or rhyme scheming. I'll just start saying a bunch of words that rhyme and sometimes come up with nonsensical wording and phrases, and if it's got a beat, I kind of go with it, and that's how a lot of Aerosmith sound and songs were created.
Yeah, it's his formula.
Yeah.
And everybody's got, the formula that I always used was very different.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really nice to, kind of go back and look at that. And now I look at that in a different way. I look at it as, hey, there are some influences there, that can be capitalized on. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Just every musician is influenced by everybody else.
Oh, sure.
And Aerosmith was a highly influential band.
Sure. How else do you have a 50-year career, Gar? And the thing with what you're saying is everybody is influenced by everybody else. I mean, even Elvis had his influences. I mean, the blues even came before Elvis, if you will. And so Aerosmith and Led Zeppelin are not the first, major rock artists to kind of be influenced by the blues and put their spin on it. I mean, blues came even before rock and roll. It was like an early version of rock and roll, if you know what I mean. And that's why then you get artists like B.B. King and even Chuck Berry.
Well, you don't have rock and roll without Chuck Berry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't have Elvis Presley without Chuck Berry. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So really, everybody, all musicians have someone previous to them to thank.
Oh, sure.
For being the influence that they were to that individual musician. Every musician has others to thank.
Sure.
For that. And so Chuck Berry is I think all rock and rollers have Chuck Berry to thank.
Sure. He was a blueprint, if you will. And of course, Toys in the Attic is Aerosmith's third studio album, Gar. And in 2025, that album celebrates its 50th anniversary. That's the very reason we're talking about it today. The album remains Aerosmith's most commercially successful album in the United States, with, get this, Gar, a total of 9 million copies of it sold to date.
9 million. Think about that.
Yeah.
9 million.
And
that's a huge number.
Yeah, and again it said, Toys in the Attic was released on April 8, 1975 on Columbia Records, produced by Jack Douglas, who I think at the time Jack Douglas, he's a big name producer now, of course. I mean, he doesn't do as much stuff now. He's semi-retired, but from time to time,
Faded.
he's produced other acts like Cheap Trick, but it was through his work with Aerosmith, and I know on some of the early Alice Cooper albums, he was Bob Ezrin's assistant on many of those albums. So this is a guy, Jack Douglas, the producer I'm talking about now, that he built his legendary career off of Toys in the Attic, because it was one of the first big things he did as a producer on his own.
Yeah, and Aerosmith really, kind of, embraced him as that extra member of the band.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, he was, he was. They basically, when they described working with him, it's all really good. They said he was an influence.
Mm-hmm.
He was a coach.
Yeah, yeah.
He was a mentor. There were so many different things that he was to them. That he brought to the table. That it was just perfect timing for a guy like him to be paired with a band like that at that particular time in all of their careers, because it just seems to be that it's all the planets were aligned, to be able to have that kind of chemistry, and that's what they always, when they look back on that, that's really what they keep talking about, is there was just this amazing amount of chemistry that was really flowing at that time.
Yeah, yeah, and anytime anybody talks about this album, Toys in the Attic, they talk about the fact that Toys in the Attic, as we said, was Aerosmith's breakthrough album, Gar. The album saw a real significant progression in the band's sound, the songwriting, production quality. And again, I think that had a lot to do with the fact that they stepped it up even with the producer. Now, the interesting thing talking about the progression of the songwriting, it's definitely there, and you can hear it in this album. That's why, as they say, this was a breakthrough album, because they really stepped it up on this album in every regard. But the interesting thing about stepping it up, even in the songwriting, is you go back to the debut self-titled Aerosmith album a few years before, and the band's first hit single of their career, the first big breakthrough hit song they had, was the great power ballad, Dream On. So, you start off with that as your first major hit single, and you progress to the songs on, Toys in the Attic. I don't know how you can progress much from, Dream On, but they did.
Well, from what I got, in looking back, was that Dream On was from their first album.
That's what I'm saying, and that,
of course, their first album really, didn't do all that well. It
sure,
did well enough for them to stay with the record company, because if you really don't do well, they'll drop you.
Sure.
So it did well enough for them to be picked up for the next album and the next album, but it never really did well. But when Toys in the Attic came out with Sweet Emotion and Walk This Way, that is what resuscitated Dream On, and now Dream On wound up getting the attention that it deserved, but it really never would have gotten that attention had it not been for the success of Toys in the Attic.
Sure.
That was the thing that redirected everybody's attention and said, oh, here's this song too that's just as great as the other, Sweet Emotion, and, and Walk This Way. It's just kind of, all of this stuff is organic things that wound up happening, but they wound up happening, that were, that resuscitation of Dream On was like a really nice surprise, because none of the guys in the band expected it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Nobody could anticipate something like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But it just wound up happening.
You make a great point there, because it's true, when the first Aerosmith album came out, even though Dream On was on that album, it was not the massive hit that it is today. But throughout their 50-year career, in reference to Dream On, that is one of those songs that has remained in the band's set list to the very last time they hit the stage, and it because of Toys in the Attic, you're right, it kind of got a second life, and once Toys in the Attic became a hit, the DJ started playing, stuff off of the earlier albums, kind of maybe to give those albums kind of a second boost, and had Toys in the Attic not become a hit, Dream On also might not become the massive hit that it is today.
That's the point that I was making. Yeah.
Yeah. Point made. And Toys in the Attic peaked at number 30 in Canada, and believe it or not, the album never charted on the UK charts.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting, isn't it?
But by the time they came out with Toys in the Attic, they had been on the road for quite a while. And what the band was saying is during that time that they had done so much touring, that is what matured the band.
Yeah.
And really allowed them to become the musicians capable of putting together an album like Toys in the Attic, because they said, the previous albums, they were not mature enough as a band. They weren't quite ready for prime time. But by the time they went into the studio for Toys in the Attic, they were very confident as a band. And they also said that the previous two albums that they had released, that was material that they had been playing in clubs.
Oh, sure.
And for many years, leading up to them, releasing those albums. But when they went into the studio for Toys in the Attic, they really only had 3 songs, that they, that you could really hang your hat on.
Sure, yeah.
But an album consists of 11 to 12 songs. You know what I mean? Not 3 songs.
Yeah,
So for the first time in their career, at that time, they actually had to come up with the rest of the material for that, and they had never had to do that before. But because they came off of all of that touring, they were really confident. And then being paired with that producer, it just was a really, it was a wonderful time for them to be creative.
Oh, sure.
And all the planets were aligned for them to be able to be creative. And then that's what they wound up, coming up with. So it's really unique. It was a very turning point time for them, but it's also a time for them where they were doing things for the first time.
Oh, sure, Gar. I mean, and another fun fact, because this is Aerosmith's breakthrough album, as we've mentioned. Another thing that really shows you how it is a step up from the first 2 albums is, okay, this album, I believe, has 9 or 10 tracks. Now, the interesting thing is, like you said, there are tracks on here like Sweet Emotion, Walk This Way, even the title track, Toys in the Attic, that may be kind of the immediate go-to tracks that everybody knows, even the casual Aerosmith fan, because those are the songs that probably were played the most on the radio. They were the ones released as a single. But interestingly enough, like I said, I believe the album has 9 or 10 tracks total, and it's one of these albums where every single track on the album is just a monster standout track. I mean, it's one of those albums where just as much as I love Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion, all the hit singles we know that were out there, on the radio, I love other songs that weren't the massive hits. Like a great example of that is the song No More, No More.
No More, back in 1975 was getting a lot of radio airplay.
Yeah,
that's why I'm here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is to give that viewpoint that you can't get from reading it on the internet.
Sure.
But in 1975, No More was getting a lot of radio airplay. Also Adam's Apple.
Yes.
Adam's Apple When I went back, and listened to this, and I was going, oh my God, I love that song.
Yeah.
Adam's Apple is a great song.
Sure.
And if that is not regularly in blues band playlists, they're making a huge mistake, because Adam's Apple is blues from top to bottom.
Yeah.
And that song really shows Joe Perry's maturity as a guitarist. And that's another thing that really shines in Toys in the Attic. It really, really shows, how Joe Perry had matured as a guitarist.
Sure. And Adam's Apple is another one of those songs. I put it right up there, like, as one of the signature Steven Tyler songs, meaning, that's another one of those songs like Dream On that has always been in the set. And if you've ever seen the band live, or if you're just listening to the CD or the album, whatever version of it, it's one of those songs that just, man, he delivers the goods vocally. And it's one of those songs that it's just, Steven Tyler owns that. And it's another one of those songs off Toys in the Attic that, while it was not a big hit single, you very much like some of these other songs we mentioned, Gar, you'll often hear it played on classic radio these days. So that's another interesting, fun part of talking about Toys in the Attic, because they're the hit songs that everybody knows, even the casual fan, like Walk This Way. Oh, Aerosmith, yeah, I heard that song, Walk This Way, Sweet Emotion, but maybe not everybody's heard Adam's Apple, but it's still, like I said, constantly being played on classic radio.
Yeah, it's just, I've said it so many times in the Time Machine, but this is just another classic case of a band and a producer,
yeah,
capturing lightning in a bottle.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Because what happened with this album, just did not happen very often, and that's why we recognize it as special, and we give it a, it's 50-year anniversary and things like that.
Yeah.
That's why we give, this huge tipping of hat, to this, is because, what actually happened when they made this is they literally captured lightning in a bottle, which seems impossible, but it does happen, and most of the time it's the subject matter of what we're talking about in the Time Machine.
Yeah, and it's one of those albums, Gar, like I said, it's one of those albums, we're talking about a band that's had a 50-year career, and 50 years, into their career, this is one of the albums people still point to. Typically if you're an Aerosmith, the kind of the standout albums are probably, Toys in the Attic, Rock, Strava Line, and then everybody has their favorite album. But for a lot of people, this is the go-to album. And you brought up the song "Sweet Emotion." I want to talk a little bit about that, because I learned a little interesting fun fact. Gar, a fun, interesting piece of trivia here for you regarding the song "Sweet Emotion," which was the first single from Toys in the Attic. The song, get this, Gar, peaked at number 36 on the Billboard U.S. chart in 1975. And then in 1991, when it was reissued as a single, the song also peaked all those years later at the same position at number 36.
Well, I want to mention something about that song.
Yeah.
That it's definitely subject matter for this, but it's a little bit, unusual.
Okay.
Over the years, I have been at many places and heard many cover bands, and I've heard, I'd say probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 to 80% of the time.
Yeah.
Whenever I hear that cover band playing "Sweet Emotion," the bass player plays that intro wrong.
Wow.
75 to 80% of the time,
Yeah.
they play it wrong. But even though they play it wrong, you still recognize it, and the untrained musician, or the musician that doesn't pay as much attention to detail, will not notice that it's being played wrong. But truth of the matter is over the years, and it's just kind of ironic because it's not that difficult to play. You just have to pay the appropriate amount of attention. But there's just so many musicians, they play in cover bands and that's close enough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's good enough.
Gar,
that's your difference between the really good musicians and your average musicians. Not to disparage average musicians.
No.
You know what I mean? But that is a separating line.
Gar, it's interesting you bring all this up because before we even got on the phone and started recording today's show, I had a pretty good feeling that Sweet Emotion was one of the songs we were going to really talk about for the simple fact is many of our listeners know you're a former bass player. When you first started playing music, you were initially a bass player. So first of all, another interesting note about the song Sweet Emotion is the principal songwriter is actually bassist Tom Hamilton, and that's why probably not a lot of people are surprised that of that signature bass line that runs all throughout the song. I mean, that's kind of the main musical force behind the song. And kind of as a bass player, when you're hearing this for the first time, did you immediately kind of spot the fact that the bass part was like the main riff in the song?
Well, when I was in the position where I was in a cover band and I had to learn the song on bass, and I had heard so many bass players play it wrong.
Yeah.
I vowed there was hell would have to freeze over.
Yeah.
If I played it wrong.
Yeah.
So I drove that bass player, into the core of my brain.
Yeah.
When I was learning it, and it's funny because, that's what doing the time machine does to me. It brings back old memories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, Gar, okay, next song, of course, was a big part of this album that I want to talk about is Walk This Way, which, of course, was a second single released from Toys in the Attic. It was released in August of 1975, and it peaked at number 10 on the U.S. Billboard chart. Now, Gar, the interesting thing is, Aerosmith would re-record the song in 1986 with rap music superstars Run DMC, and the song hit the Billboard chart once again, but this time reaching number 4. So the newer version, reached a higher chart position. So I guess I'd like to ask you, when you heard Walk This Way for the first time back in 1975, what was your initial reaction, and what do you think of the two different versions?
Well, okay, because I was definitely around at that time and to experience what you're asking.
Yeah.
Of course, to my core, especially at that time, I was through and through, all the way to the core, a rock and roll bass player.
Sure.
And so when I heard that, I really was not, warm, to rap and all that stuff, and not like as a, I was against it.
Yeah.
It was just it's not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
And that's my way of still maintaining respect.
Sure.
For other things that maybe I'm not, it don't have my attention. But I don't want people to get the wrong impression that I'm disrespecting. I was just, basically taking the stance at that time that it just was not my cup of tea.
Yeah, and I will.
Now, here is the thing, though.
Yeah.
is, finding out, later, because I did not recognize this at the time.
Yeah.
But Steven Tyler's vocal delivery in Walk This Way is almost exactly the same way that rap started.
Yes.
You know what I mean? When
Yeah.
rap started. And and so what it really Run DMC was wanting to do this in collaboration with Aerosmith was to give Steven Tyler that respect of doing something that they are embracing with all of their heart. You know what I mean? But, they were recognizing he was one of those people that kind of paved that way, for rap music to even, be considered. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
So it was really kind of a move by them giving respect to a predecessor. And when I found out about that, that's nothing but, that gets nothing but respect from me, to Run DMC to do something like that.
Yeah.
Because it really makes sense now.
Sure.
Because back then I was going, well, why did they choose that song? Why this and why that? And truthfully, it is very true that them doing that resurrected Aerosmith's career and really gave them a second wind in their career.
It really.
So you really have to give respect to Run DMC for doing that.
Yeah, it really did, Gar. And you make a great point because, of course, when Walk This Way originally is released as a single in 1975, when the album comes out, Toys in the Attic, of course, 1975 predates there ever being any kind of rap artist. At that point, nobody even, has ever heard rap music. It hasn't, I guess you could say, been invented or created yet. And interestingly enough, after the creation of rap music as a genre, all these years later, people kind of realize that, if you listen to Walk This Way, I'm talking about the original version, that the way he's doing his vocals, it's got kind of rap influences before there was ever rap music. It's a very interesting thing. And then it's interesting that Run DMC maybe picked up on that and said, that's kind of predates rap, but there's that rap influence in there, and they weren't maybe even aware they were doing it at the time, because of course rap music, like I said, didn't even exist. But also, like you said, in 1986, Aerosmith had kind of just released like a flop album the year before, Done with Mirrors. It had one hit song like Let the Music Do the Talking. But this they put out, and then all of a sudden everybody is interested in Aerosmith again. And then by 1987, they released their comeback album, Permanent Vacation, and that had all the songs like Dude Looks Like a Lady off, that we saw all those great MTV videos for. So again, it really gave Aerosmith, a second boost in their career.
Yeah, and it's really nice because it kind of happened at a time, when they part of the reason why their career, had taken a dip was because of their problems with intoxicants and drugs. And things of that nature. And by the time this happened, they had a chance, to see what they were doing to themselves, and realize that they needed to make some serious changes. So both, because previous to that, Steven Tyler and Joe Perry, their badge of honor for many years was they were called the Toxic Twins.
Yes. And
for many years previous to that, that was their label. They were the Toxic Twins.
Yeah,
and that was a label because of how toxic they were with drug use and alcohol and any all the other things that you can imagine.
Yeah.
Because living the rock star life was very easy to become an alcoholic or to become a drug addict.
Yeah.
At that time, it was it was the breeding ground for alcoholism and drug addiction and all of that stuff. It really was. The 70s and the 80s were when you look at the history of the musicians and how short their lives were,
mm-hmm.
and how their lives had deteriorated because of all of that abuse.
Yeah.
You can just go down the list of almost everybody in existence in the music industry, and it was rare for people to not have these problems.
Yeah,
and not have these health problems, and not have their lives deteriorate in their later years like everybody else did. It was very rare for it not to happen.
Yeah, and besides suffering from those addictions and demons, Gar, they were also dubbed the Toxic Twins because even the other guys in the band and people that worked close to the band would see Steven and Joe had this kind of special kind of brotherly love-hate kind of bond, where they really loved each other, but they would get into these crazy arguments. So it's like a love-hate thing that was going on with them, and that inspired a lot of the songs that they would get together and write. Now, is one more fun kind of little trivia fact.
Can I point something out?
Sure.
You just made a point right there.
Yeah.
But that point exists in virtually every other band in existence.
Sure. Yeah.
On Saturdays in the morning, leading all the way up to about noon, on Reel's channel, REELS, Reel's channel.
Sure.
They show Breaking the Band.
Okay.
And basically the history of all of these iconic bands.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to put that on and just kind of let it go till about noon.
Yeah.
And just kind of let it go. And virtually every single episode has the element, the toxic twin element, in that band.
Yeah.
Where it becomes toxic. And also, virtually every one of those episodes has the deterioration of the band because of drug use and alcohol, abuse.
Yeah.
Not use, but abuse.
Yeah.
The Van Halen story, the Judas Priest. Virtually every band has that element.
And I got to mention this, Gar. Probably one of the saddest examples of that. I'm sure you've heard of the band Creedence Clearwater Revival. Now that's a band that featured two guys that were really brothers in real life, and sadly they were close before they were in the band together. But the more successful the band became, the two brothers got to a point in life where they really hated each other. It got to a point where they sadly quit speaking, and one of the older brother died, and they never sadly made up. And then John Fogerty's still alive.
What the older brother did?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the older brother died, and John Fogerty, who was the.
No. Do you know what the older brother did?
Well, I know that there was. I knew that there's a lot. I read stuff about there's a lot of friction between them, and the older brother.
Let me clarify. Let me clarify because I know what he did.
Okay, go ahead.
It was really the older brother.
Okay.
That was a betrayal to
John Fogerty.
John Fogerty.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. What he did was he. John Fogerty. They had the Creedence had signed a contract with the record company.
Okay.
Where the record company was making all of the profit off of the songs that John Fogerty was writing.
Okay.
Because none of the other guys in Creedence were the songwriters. It was John Fogerty that was the songwriter.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay.
Okay, he was the creative force.
Yes.
And when John Fogerty came to the realization that all of his hard work was going in the pockets of the record company instead of going to him and the band where it should have been going, then he decided that he was no longer going to write, any more of the material, and he was going to, pull himself out of,
The record company. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the other band members sided with the record company.
Oh, okay. Interesting. They
sided with the record company against John Fogerty.
Wow.
So that was the catalyst that made John Fogerty quit. And John Fogerty refused to write any new material during that time that he was contractually obligated.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
Company.
Yeah. Okay.
And that went on for many, many years, all the way up until the 80s, I believe it was, when he was finally free of that contract, and he came out with that song, "Put Me In, Coach."
Oh, yeah.
You know, that song?
Mm-hmm.
That is when he came out with that song. And he would not come out with any new material, that where the money would go to the record company until that contract was expired.
Yeah, in fact, I do know.
That is the reason, because his brother really should have sided with him.
Oh.
And his brother sided with the record company.
Interesting. Oh, there's a future episode there, Gar. But one more thing about the song "Walk This Way," Gar. Have you ever heard the story of what inspired Steven Tyler to write that song?
Oh, I'm sorry?
Okay, in reference to the song "Walk This Way," did you ever hear the story of what influenced Steven Tyler?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a great story.
The name. It's the story behind how the song got its name.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I do, but go ahead and tell it.
Okay, well, apparently he was watching the classic horror film that we've done a great episode on, Young Frankenstein, and that was...
all of the band members, but not Steven Tyler. Steven Tyler didn't go with them.
Oh, okay, but I do know that they got the title, like you said, from I guess some of the bandmates watching the movie, and they thought it was a great title, and then he kind of based it around that. And I guess after the song became a hit, he did eventually go and watch the movie, and he loved it just as much.
Well, what they did is the rest of the band, because there was a movie theater just right around the corner from where they were rehearsing. Mm-hmm. So they wound up taking a break and going to see Young Frankenstein, and they came back and they just thought that scene was so funny, and they were still giggling about it when they came back to the studio, and then they were telling Steven Tyler that he had to name that new song "Walk This Way." And Steven Tyler's reaction was, nobody's going to tell me what to name this song. I'm writing this. Yeah. Nobody's going to tell me, what to call it.
Yeah.
And then he disappeared, and then a couple of hours later, he came back with the song completed, and with that as the name.
Yeah.
At first, his reaction was he was rejecting it, but he actually embraced it and then wound up running with it.
Yeah, that's a great story. I couldn't believe that the first time I heard it. And of course, Gar, as we've mentioned, there are other notable songs throughout the album. One of those songs, again, that you always hear from time to time being played on classic rock radio, that I just always loved from the first time I got my hands on the album, was Big 10-Inch Record, which is a cheeky cover of a 1952 Bulls Moose Jackson song, known for its double entendre lyrics. Now,
double entendre.
Excuse me, I got tongue tied. But let me just say, a fun thing about doing a cover like this is it's not a song that everybody has heard unless you've came from the 1952 era. And again, I was interested to find out who did the original version, and then once I did, it's like, who the hell is Bull Moose Jackson? But the fun thing is, I was able to go on YouTube, find the original version, and I thought, oh, okay, yeah, I could see why these guys would be influenced. But it's a great blues, and the original version is really really great blues tune. And it sounds a little. I mean, you can. It sounds a little bit like Aerosmith's version, but I gotta be honest. Aerosmith really put their stamp on this song. And if you listen to the original version, it kicks ass too. But it's a different type of a song,
Well, it's from a different time.
Yeah. But I mean? That's cool when
what I got from it was Joe Perry was basically saying when because he was listening to a lot of that type of blues.
Yeah.
He said that the blues. Basically, I'm paraphrasing, but basically what we listen to as blues now is kind of a blues greatest hit.
Sure, yeah.
But the blues that was going on during the time that Bull, was doing his version of that, it was very common for all of the blues artists that were playing at that time to have songs with double entendres.
Yeah.
With that kind of wink in the eye that they're actually talking about something that they shouldn't be. And, pushing the envelope, into areas that are considered inappropriate.
Yeah,
that was a common thing during that time, when all of the blues players that were also playing at the same time as Bull, when he did his version, or he did, Big 10-inch.
Yeah.
Record.
And Gar, I love songs like that because it shows you how gifted somebody is as a songwriter, that they can come up with phrasing or words where they're not really, it's not really what they're talking about. They're using it for a different meaning, as you said. Like, there's a line in the song Big 10-inch Record where he's talking about sitting on a muffin. He's not talking about, an English muffin you have with breakfast. I think most people know what he's talking about. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, there are other musicians that also, who have double entendres have been a big part of what they do.
Yeah.
Scott, during, when he was alive and he was fronting AC/DC, look back at the lyrics that he writes.
Yeah.
I mean, big ball.
Yeah, okay.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Double entendre.
Yeah.
But he has, there are so many other songs that Bon Scott used to do that also had the element of double entendres. That was, he had that kind of,
approach,
troublemaker wink.
Yeah.
Kind of, wink,
yeah,
kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
And that was a big part of blues during the time, that the original version of Big 10-inch Record, when blues players were playing and doing what they were doing, previous to Aerosmith.
Sure. And another song we talked a little bit about today was Adam's Apple. And a fun fact about that song is I learned that it has lyrics, Gar, about biblical temptation. And Adam's Apple is obviously, people like initially might think, oh, he's talking about all men have, under their chin. No, he's Adam is in reference to Adam and Eve, but you got to kind of read in between the lines.
Yeah. And that guitar riff that Joe Perry does is so bluesy and infectious.
Yeah.
I mean, it is just as catchy as the catchy part of the song that's supposed to be the chorus, the catchy part.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That riff is just as catchy as Steven Tyler's lyrics.
And I will say, Joe Perry is a guitar player. His guitar parts on any given Aerosmith song really help to make the song shine. But I will say, while we talk a lot about Joe Perry, Brad Whitford as a rhythm guitar player is just equally as important of a sound of Aerosmith. But let's be honest, he's overshadowed a lot by Joe Perry.
Oh, you mean Steven Tyler?
No, I'm talking about the other guitar player in Aerosmith, Brad Whitford. Yeah.
Brad Whitford. Oh,
Yeah.
Definitely overshadowed. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you even listen to their material,
Yeah.
what Brad Whitford is playing, it's obvious that it's more of the mentality of supporting what Joe Perry is doing.
Sure.
Kind of like Izzy Stradlin in Guns N' Roses.
With Slash, yeah.
It was whatever Izzy was playing it was really, really well crafted supporting parts to what Slash is doing.
Yeah.
And also, a lot of people don't know it, but Aerosmith was a huge influence on Guns N' Roses.
Oh, sure.
And when I first heard Brownstone on the radio for the very first time, it's uncanny because I remember what I was thinking when I was listening to it, because I was actually establishing my opinion at that time because it was the first time.
Yeah.
And I was telling myself, "Ooh, I hear shades of Aerosmith in this."
Yeah,
And now, as things go, now you understand why I was hearing those shades of Aerosmith. But just like the Guns N' Roses was influenced by Aerosmith, when you hear the song "Round and Round,"
sure.
it's not a remake of the rap song, or a
No.
predate of that. It's a song that when you hear it, I hear heavy shades of Black Sabbath.
Oh, sure. And Round, Aerosmith song is, it's not even a cover. It's not even, it's not, it's a totally different song from Rat's Round and Round. So people need to know that.
It's not.
And the other.
It really sounds very Black Sabbath.
The other interesting thing, Gar, that I can share with you, I got an Aerosmith kind of related story as far as Guns N' Roses. I recently interviewed Alan Nevin, who, of course, is a former manager for both Guns N' Roses and Great White. He has a book coming out. That's the reason I was interviewing him. But one of the things that came up in the interview was when Aerosmith was on their 1987 comeback tour, their manager at the time, I believe his name was Tim Collins, they wanted to have Guns N' Roses open. That's when Guns N' Roses was first starting to break with Appetite. And the manager for Aerosmith at the time was concerned about having Guns N' Roses as the opening band because the guys in Aerosmith were just newly sobered, and they had sobered up and everything. And Aerosmith's manager he made a point that, okay, if Guns N' Roses were going to open up for Aerosmith, that they had to agree to stay away from the Aerosmith guys because they were afraid that that Guns N' Roses would tempt Aerosmith to go back to doing drugs and alcohol.
Rightly so. Honestly, if you know anything about addiction, those points are very valuable. They're very valid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because when you are an addict, all it takes is something light to trigger an addict to fall off the wagon.
Yeah.
It can be something as light as just seeing something that triggers it.
Yeah.
That could trigger a falling off the wagon. And Guns N' Roses at that time was just fully engulfed in alcohol,
everything.
abuse.
Yeah.
Not consumption, but alcohol and drug abuse.
Yeah.
They were in full swing, with no control barriers, no safety barriers up anywhere at all.
Yeah.
So very rightly so, Guns N' Roses, if they would have had them open, very well could have definitely had that kind of effect.
Yeah. And Gar, I'm sure as a GNR fan, you remember, when Guns N' Roses won or they showed up to the American Music Awards at one point, I think to to introduce an award or something, and Duff and Slash just showed up snockered, and that's what is remembered from that moment.
Well, and that's what people talk about now, like years later, how messed they were. They don't talk about the award, but going back to what aforementioned, was that the 70s and the 80s were extreme, breeding grounds for alcoholism and drug addiction. Really, they were not just for the use of that stuff. It was a extreme breeding ground. Not only were people doing this on a regular basis. But people were going to the extreme boundaries.
Sure.
And that's why in the early 70s you had so many people all of a sudden dying.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because there were no guardrails. There was all of these artists were being fed, massive amounts of cocaine.
Sure.
They were being fed massive amounts of alcohol, unlimited amounts of alcohol. That's the best way to put it. Unlimited amounts of cocaine and unlimited amounts of alcohol and unlimited amounts of anything else that was going on at the same time.
Yeah, and I've heard stories. I've heard stories, Gar, over the years, where back, especially in the 70s and even the 80s, as part of the money the bands would get for being in the studio and recording a new album, they would get the record company actually would sometimes deliver like the drugs to the studio for the band, in the back door or whatever.
It's a fact.
It's
a fact. All you have to do is go to the Real channel on Saturday morning and put it on and let it go, and there's going to be another story of another fucking gigantic mirror with a mountain of fucking cocaine on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now another.
It was this behavior at that time, even by the public, was celebrated.
Yeah.
And that's another thing, because now we know how toxic and how detrimental it is, and how now it's been superseded by other drugs that are even more dangerous.
Yeah.
Now, all of this, has a really dark cloud over it.
Mm-hmm.
But back in the 70s and the 80s, that dark cloud was not as dark. You know what I mean? There was not as many people. It was actually being celebrated. And of course, the public was mirroring what they felt their favorite artist was living like. And that's the reason why it was so common to go to concerts and always see somebody within your nearby orbit at that concert being over intoxicated, either by a drug or by cocaine or by alcohol or whatever. But it was very common to go to those concerts, and there was somebody in a close orbit of where you were that was over intoxicated. And that is that celebration of the public mirroring, not just wanting to dress like their favorite artist, but also wanting to try to mirror their lives to their favorite artist.
Oh, sure.
And that was going on at that time, and everybody that was going to concerts at that time knows exactly what I'm talking about.
And Gar, another thing that we should bring up that's kind of a fun fact, you know this yourself as being a performing artist yourself, this dates back to, the 60s and 70s when, when big bands first started going out and performing live, but a big part of the concert experience these days, if you want to get down to the business aspect of it, when you're in a band and you're performing live, you make money off of, the tickets, you get a certain percentage of that. But the venue, how they make their money is every concert you go to, they got beer there available because that's how the venue makes their money. You see more people buying beer probably at the amphitheaters and the venues than buying actual food. But that's how a lot of these venues has become a big part of the concert business, if you will. And a lot of times you even have beer companies sponsored a tour or a concert or something like that.
Well, this is, it's just what, everything has evolved.
Yeah.
Because in the 60s and the 70s, touring and, concerts and all of that stuff was much more grassroots
Sure.
at that time.
Yeah.
And so, there were a lot of, close bonding that was going on because it was kind of a new thing at that time, and people were all becoming involved and everything like that, and there were a lot of really close bonding and stuff like that going on, and it had much more of a family kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
And backstage, maybe had, partying going on, but it also has a family element going on backstage at that time too.
Yeah.
Kids running around, backstage and all of that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But nowadays it's become much more corporate, and it's become much more about the almighty dollar.
Yeah.
And which always makes when things start becoming all about nothing but just about the almighty dollar.
Yeah.
Now it's lost its family feel to it, and now it's lost all of that bonding, that close bonding, and all of that stuff, and that whole experience now is a microcosm to the 70s and the 80s. Because touring and concerts and all of that kind of stuff nowadays, it's all corporate. It's all about making money, and it's all about how much can we pull out of all of these people that are coming to our shows. How much can we get them to let go of their money? You know what I mean?
Oh, sure.
And what's happening is the general public that supported music in the early years can no longer afford to go to these concerts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And all of the people that started the whole thing and supported the whole thing when it all began, and it had that whole family atmosphere and that family feel to it, that is all gone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's turned into a business.
It doesn't have that, and the more greedy that becomes, the uglier it becomes.
Yeah.
But to be honest with you, it has these big concerts have become a thing only for the rich.
Yeah, it really has.
The only people that can afford to go to these are the upper echelon, the people that are millionaires and billionaires.
Yeah.
And the rest of us can no longer afford. And that is the reason why the popularity of tribute bands has lasted for so long.
I totally agree.
The tribute bands started in the early 2000s, the late 90s, early 2000s. I started doing tribute bands in the late 90s.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it really, took its big foothold in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And it's lasted, about 20 years.
Yeah,
and that's a long, long stretch.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
There has to be something that becomes popular for the young crowd that is affordable for them to embrace. And it ain't going to be a resurrection of what used to be in the past.
Yeah.
It's going to be something that the younger generations are going to embrace as their own.
Sure.
Because those younger generations don't really want to embrace, the 80s anymore and all of that stuff. And people are thinking that embrace is going to be for the 90s. But the 90s is where things started taking a downward turn.
Yeah.
And so all of the musical artists are not iconic like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and Guns N' Roses
and Aerosmith.
And just go down the list of all of these iconic. None of the 90s bands have that iconic sustainability like the Led Zeppelin.
Oh yeah.
That.
Gar.
But that seems to be the trend.
Sure.
Where they're trying to go. They're trying to adapt.
Yeah.
But I don't think that there's going to be that same kind of success that the tribute bands that were doing of the iconics of the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah, and Gar, I've had real fun doing this episode, Dave, but before we wrap it up, I wanted to kind of mention two songs that we haven't mentioned so far. A song, Uncle Salty. The song deals with abuse and exploration. And interestingly enough, I don't know that when you listen to the song you really hear that, but I kind of listened to it today and I said, oh, okay, I kind of get it. And then the other song is You See Me Crying, which is a power ballad that featured both piano and orchestration, which was a much more mature sound for the band.
Yeah, and the thing that their choice to do the piano more of a honky-tonk style, rather than a grand piano style, that was perfect because it goes right along with the bluesy feel because those early bluesy times where the double entendres was popular, honky-tonk piano was part of it.
Yeah. And Gar...
If anybody walks away from this episode, and is not familiar, you have to hear Toys in the Attic because it's a great song and Joe Perry's guitar playing is phenomenal. Adam's Apple for its sheer bluesiness and, again, Joe Perry's guitar playing.
Yeah.
Everybody does know Walk This Way, so, come on.
No. Yeah.
And emotion, but No More, that was getting a lot of radio airplay, and if you're not familiar, go back. And Round and Round, it's definitely worth, going and rehashing because, those are lost diamonds.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I will
really
say...
songs that are worthy of if not having a first listen, songs that are worthy of having a re-listen.
And I will say, going back to 1975 and Toys in the Attic, the song, at that time, that was the heaviest song Aerosmith had ever done. It closest thing you could say that they'd gone to be considered, even being able to be called a heavy metal band.
Yeah. Really, very Black Sabbath-y.
Yeah. And Gar, this has been a great fun episode to do. I want to wish everybody again a great happy Father's Day. We're recording it on Father's Day. And finally, what I wanted to say is we've changed our schedule around a little because next time we were going to do a different show, but instead we're going to do put together a tribute show about the Beach Boys legend Brian Wilson, who of course sadly passed away this week at the age 82, but he was just such a musical genius that we thought it'd be fun to look back on his life and pay tribute to him.
Oh, we go back to the 60s.
Yeah, Gar.
Yeah.
Well, you take care, my friend, and I'll talk to you later.
Happy Father's Day, everybody!
Happy Father's Day! Woo!